I get asked all the time, have you made a video about the cult you grew up in? And the answer is yes, kind of, sort of. Last summer, I decided to make a 3-part series on the IBLP Cult, and I filmed the first part. It took me many hours. The editing was exhausting. I had to watch way too much of the basic seminar that I had already gone through 4 times as a teenager. So I really wasn't interested in going through it again, but I basically did in order to make this video. And then I just wasn't happy with the video. For one reason, I felt underqualified. I just felt like I did not know enough about the cult to make a video on the cult. But the thing is, I grew up in it. I know it personally. Even if it doesn't make sense to the outside world, I understand what I'm saying. I know what I'm saying is accurate, even if maybe it could be tweaked historically, maybe I make a few trivial errors. The overall message is correct because I lived it. Anyway, so after I made it, I was just super unsatisfied. I just felt like I didn't know what I was talking about, even though I definitely do. And then 2 weeks after I edited the video, my dog passed away, and I had no motivation to make anything creative, especially not to talk about something that's so deeply personal and uncovers a lot of trauma. And I wanted to make a 3-part video, and I just made part 1. I didn't make part 2, which was how I was in a cult, how it impacted me, and I didn't make part 3, which was the downfall of ATI, and I wanted to go into the rise and fall of the Duggar family, who deeply impacted the trajectory of Bill Gothard and ATI, and like how it grew and how it fell so rapidly and how it still impacts us today. I still want to make part 2 and 3. It's going to happen someday, soon hopefully, but I can't keep waiting until it's perfect to share what I made with the world. And I rewatched what I made, and I am proud of it. I am proud of what I said. I know what I said was accurate, and I've read books since then. I read Jesus and John Wayne in order to make sure I wasn't making any factual errors, and I'm not making factual errors. What I'm saying is accurate. So I thought, why not share it now? It's only part 1, but sharing part 1 is good enough, you know? I can share part 1, and then I'll share part 2 and 3, but I need to script part 2 and 3, and not sharing part 1 is not good for me because I will never share it if I don't share it now. Here is part 1 of the rise and fall of ATI, a deep dive into the IBLP cult from yours truly. So this was made June 2021, so I look a bit different. I've grown a lot since then. I'm in a totally different hairstyle, but June 2021 Elizabeth was absolutely correct about ATI/IBLP, and you should listen to her. So here goes. In 1961, Bill Gothard founded an organization called Campus Teams. Campus Teams went around to different churches and youth groups and explained how they could get right with God, basically. He changed the name of that to the Institute in Basic Youth Conflicts and started the Basic Seminar. The Basic Seminar has 7 basic principles that he would teach over a course of 24 hours over 6 nights to groups of people across America. He claims that these principles are universal and people will suffer natural and divine consequences for violating them. So what are these principles? The principles are design, authority, responsibility, suffering, ownership, freedom, and success. The design principle. People should understand their specific purpose for which God created them. Gothard wrote, "A person's attitude towards himself has a profound influence on his attitude towards God, his family, his friends, his future, and many other significant areas of life."
I said, "I think maybe you have a bitterness toward God." And she said, "I'm not bitter toward God. Now, why would I be bitter toward God and want to be a missionary?" I said, "Yeah, that is a problem." But I said, "How long have you resented your height?" She said, "A couple of years." I said, "Well, in the final analysis, who made you as tall as you are?" And she had to acknowledge she'd never put 2 and 2 together. Finally, she said, "Well, I guess God made me as tall as I am." And you know, there are many, many today who have a floating bitterness toward God, and they don't even know it. They might be bitter toward just life in general, or they might be bitter toward their parents, or bitter toward circumstances, or bitter toward authority, or bitter toward people, because they don't really accept the way God made them.
The authority principle. Inward peace results when people respect and honor the authorities that God has put into their life. It is based on the idea that God gives direction, protection, and provision through human authorities. And for many of us, especially young women in this who went through the basic seminar, we remember the authority principle because through this we learned the umbrella of protection. And the umbrella of protection taught that God had authority through his son Jesus, and he gave that authority to men, and that women and children fell under men's authority. And if you walked out from under the authority of a man who was in direct connection with Jesus, then you would be open to all sorts of horrible things that could go wrong in your life.
Usually we resist, we reject God-ordained authority. We push them away. God warns, the eye that mocks at his father and pushes away his mother, the ravens of the valley shall pick it out, and the young eagles shall eat it. That's a very gory scene. The first step of a raven or an eagle coming down upon some carrion, an animal slain, the first thing they'll do is go over and pick at the eye. Because if that animal doesn't defend its own eye, then it's dead. They know to spot death in the eye. Do you know there are wicked, evil people, more and more in our day, who are able to look in the eye of a teenager and spot rebellion? And they know exactly how to take advantage of teenagers who have rebellion in their eye. And that's why God is warning teenagers. You get out from under authority, and you're exposing yourself to all kinds of destruction and devastation. The ravens in the valley shall pick it out, and the young eagles shall come eat it.
Moving on from authority, the responsibility principle is that a clear conscience results when people realize they are responsible to God for every thought, word, action, and motive. Part of this principle is asking for forgiveness from anyone you have ever offended, so that no one can point a finger at you and say, "You've offended me," and never ask for my forgiveness.
So it was like the Lord was saying to me, if you don't obey me in this area of clearing your conscience in these things you have done that I've revealed to you now, then you might just as well put your Christianity up on the shelf, because it's not going anywhere.
The suffering principle is that people should allow the hurts from offenders to reveal blind spots in their own lives. Genuine joy is a result of fully forgiving offenders. Suffering led into Bill Gothard's teaching on sexual assault and abuse, in which he stated that all abuse and sexual assault was created by God to purify you as a person. So I remember as a young teenager looking through the paperwork on what to do if you were sexually abused, and basically Gothard taught that all of it was in order to make you a better person, and therefore you should just forgive your offenders, and there was never any mention or concern about reporting your abuser and getting justice through the legal system. It was simply about making it so that you felt right with God and forgiving others and victim blaming you. So even if you were a child, Bill Gothard taught that you were not right with God, and therefore sexual abuse or abuse itself could make you a better person, and therefore it was victim blaming in order to make you feel better with God. I feel like I am totally not able to talk about this in the right way because it is such a horrible way to address sexual abuse and assault and child abuse in your life, but it deeply impacted me and my story. So I just wanted to briefly explain that in this part one of what the cult was. So moving on from the suffering principle. The ownership principle is that people are stewards, not owners of their possessions. Gothard teaches that anger results from not yielding personal rights to God.
One day, a freshman girl said to me, why would God allow me to be born in a family where my mother has been in and out of a mental hospital for 18 years, my father's not a Christian, and all these pressures in our family? And I said to her, God has allowed that irritation for you because he wants to build insight and wisdom, character in your life. Why don't you make it your goal to assist your mother in overcoming her mental problems? She said, how can I do that? I said, well, the first thing you do is explain to your mother the one thing that's not been explained to her so far, that she is responsible for her attitudes. She's not a victim. She's responsible for her words, her thoughts, her actions, her attitudes. And when that daughter was in a tactful, loving way, able to help her mother see her own personal responsibility, that mother was able to come to new mental freedom.
Moving on from the ownership principle. The freedom principle is enjoying the desire and the power to do what is right. Moral purity is the result of true freedom. The key to freedom is learning how to walk in the Spirit and appropriate the victory that Christ has already won through his death, burial, and resurrection.
We are told in Scripture that if we walk in the Spirit, we will not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. So the major question comes, how does a person walk in the Spirit? Now we want to build a solid foundation here so that we'll be able, without any doubt, to have complete victory.
And finally, the last principle in these messy principles. The success principle is that when people learn to think God's thoughts by meditating and memorizing scripture, they make wise decisions and fulfill their life purposes. So the success principle dictated that everything went back to scripture. So when you were confused about your future career path, what you should do, should you go on family vacation, should you study science, whatever question you had in life, Gothard's answer was go back and study more scripture, and by memorizing and meditating on the Bible, you will get an answer to whatever question and direction you need in your life. Now that I've explained what the basic seminar taught, how did it become such an event? So conservative churches started sending young people to the basic seminar as a solution to their answer to the counterculture movement of the 60s and the 70s. And these seminars became hugely popular and hugely successful. They were very great at scaring young people away from rock music, from modern dating, from sex and the sexual revolution and feminism, and also scaring them from sending their children to public schools. In answer to that, in 1984, Bill Gothard founded the Advanced Training Institute. The Advanced Training Institute was the homeschool curriculum that would help families raise their children according to the principles of the basic seminars. At first, it was very difficult and an elite program to join. My parents were in the second year to join. So the first year they applied and they were rejected. But in 1986 they joined, and I'm going to just call the Advanced Training Institute ATI from this point on. And ATI became very much the public face of the Institute and Basic Life Principles. IBLP was based in Chicago, and ATI went to every family that joined the program. The curriculum went into their lives, and they became just part of the community of the churches that had ATI families in them and the communities that existed and grew from the homeschool movement of ATI. When a family joined ATI, they signed the ATI contract. This was a contract that dictated how they were to live in their own homes. It included such things as promising to not have a TV in your home, to have daily devotions with your children, for the wife to not take an outside job, and for the husband to provide for the children and their wives. It also indicated that any child over the age of 14 was to personally sign that contract as well, because children over the age of 14, in Gothard's mind, were of the age that they needed to make that decision on their own. And if you had someone over the age of 14, then if you joined ATI, that child might not be as interested in following the strict code of conduct, so they wouldn't be the ideal ATI family. But most ATI families joined when their children were not even born yet, or babies. ATI held yearly family conferences. From the start in 1984 to 2003, these conferences were held in Knoxville, Tennessee, and they were massive. I went to my very first conference in 2003, and I just remember it was huge. There was hundreds and hundreds of children in the children's choir. There was the Alert Boys program and the Excels Girls program. We had sessions every day and seminars. I remember that year, Joni Eareckson Tada spoke. There were other more political people who would speak at these conferences. They had a great deal of influence on the ATI community, and of course it was headlined by none other than Bill Gothard. After 2003, due to the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the city of Knoxville was not interested in hosting a conference that attracted thousands and thousands of people to the city due to the inherent fear of the early 2000s after 9/11 of a large crowd drawing safety concerns. Instead, ATI started to have 4 family conferences a year, and one of those conferences was in Big Sandy, Texas at the Alert campus, and that is the conference that my family went to. And what is Alert? I mentioned Alert and Excel. Alert and Excel were 2 programs. Alert was the Air Land Emergency Resource Team, and it was a paramilitary program for young men who could join and learn necessary skills like EMS and first response and diving, and like there was a police academy, and it was a good program if you were interested in becoming a first responder. But it was also paramilitary. So it was very much, they called it basic, and there was advanced basic, and it was very much like you were joining the ATI military. And the Alert campus was huge, so they had a lot of young men who went through that. I knew several guys who went through Alert. And then there was Excel, which was held in Dallas, and it was the program for young women. It was 2 months long, and I went through Excel. Excel was basically a program that you could go through that was basically a finishing school for young ladies. We learned embroidery and color coding for our clothes. We learned how to sew using a basic sewing machine, and we got talked about dating and courtship. Most girls who went through Excel were 16 to 18 years old, and were just on like the verge of sexuality and discovering ourselves and being interested in that sort of life. And Excel was to make sure that none of us were going to deviate from the plan that ATI set forth. The entire time you were at Excel, you weren't allowed to talk about the 3 M's: music, movies, or men. And if you did, if you mentioned a music, movies, or man, you got demerits. And I was a very outstanding Excel student. I didn't get any demerits for mentioning music, movies, or men, because none of those things interested me, because I'd never been exposed to music, movies, or men at that time. How in the world did ATI teach kids? ATI was not an educational curriculum. It was basically up to each family to determine how much education their child needed. ATI used this curriculum called the Wisdom Booklets, and I think there were 53, and they were based on the Sermon on the Mount and Matthew 5. So each Sermon on the Mount would say, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." So we'd have an entire booklet on "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall inherit the earth." What I remember of the Blessed are the poor in spirit curriculum is that for the history section of that book, we talked about the French Revolution and how the French were not poor in spirit, and therefore God did not bless their revolution, while the American Revolution was poor in spirit and God blessed it. That is what I remember from that month's study of Blessed are the poor in spirit. So every verse in Matthew 5 was used as a sort of launching pad to discuss world history and science, sometimes math, a little bit of Greek, and that's about it. That was not a very firm education in the slightest. If you were well read, as I was, you would pick up on other forms of education. My parents bought math and English textbooks from Rod and Staff, which is an Amish/Mennonite community textbook for Amish/Mennonite schools. That is what we used to learn English and math. Other families just used the wisdom booklets. I think the Duggars claim that they only use the wisdom booklets. But as you can imagine, it is not a well-rounded education. It is up to each parent to supplement the wisdom booklets as they so choose. So some ATI children are very well educated because their parents were more interested in supplemental material. Others are not so well educated because their parents did not have the skills or the information needed to further educate their children. While the Duggars brought ATI and the cult community into the media forefront of the American conscience, and like people became aware of families that had large amounts of children, and people who practiced courtship, people who didn't use birth control or listen to rock music or dress modernly, it also brought ATI under increased scrutiny. In 2009, when the Duggars show premiered on television, I was 15 years old. That year, I would go on a journey to the heart, which was created in the latter years of the ATI cult in order to reestablish Bill Gothard's authority over young people in the cult community. And then a year later, I would go to Excel. I would not officially leave ATI until I was 20. In that time frame, I had to come to terms with the fact that Bill Gothard was a sexual predator, with the fact that ATI fostered abuse, and the fact that my own abuse and story was swept under the rug in order to create an image of a Christian community that was right with God and followed all the principles of the basic seminars. But they did all of this at the expense of many women, many children, and all of our free expression, thought, and humanity. I'm going to explore the downfall of ATI and how the greater media spotlight from the Duggars TV show led to the downfall of Bill Gothard and his resignation in 2014, and later the collapse of the ATI media conglomerate that existed in their image. But we're gonna get to that in part 3. Now, we're gonna get to part 2. My life in the cult. How in the heck did I end up in a cult? Editing Liz here. You're gonna have to stick around for part 2 because it is not ready, but I thought, why not share part 1? Because I am proud of it. As I said in the intro, I hope you watched all the way to the end. If you did, kudos on you. Tell me what you learned. Tell me what you thought. I gotta find the music for the intro because that music was fantastic and I don't remember where it is or what it's named. So I gotta find it to make part 2. And tell me what you want to know about what it was like to grow up in ATI in part 2. And I'm gonna go start some research on the Duggars for part 3. Thanks for sticking around. Be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to follow me on Instagram. And if you're interested in checking out my Patreon, check it out. It's linked below. And don't forget to pre-order my book, which has nothing to do with growing up in a cult, but still a very fun Little Mermaid retelling, and it's very gay, so check it out. See y'all later. Ta-da!
We're sorry. You have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service.